My session is all about NetScaler automation with PowerShell. A year ago I was here with a colleague of mine doing NetScaler automation with Puppet, but I'm more a PowerShell girl. So while he was the Puppet expert, I kind of took a different direction and geeked out with PowerShell. So today I want to share with you kind of like my pet project. So who am I, for those of you that do not know me? My name is Esther Bartel. I work at Pepperbyte, which is a consultancy firm in the Netherlands. That's my day job, so to speak. And to be able to finance my pet projects and do all the community stuff that I want to share with at least the Citrix community, I wrote a book a while ago, and to make sure that those royalties were spent to contribute back to the community, I kind of created a small company to finance myself. So that's where the Cognition IT name comes from. And the difference.
When's the next book coming out?
Well, that's one of the things. At Pepperbyte we are really busy trying to gain more market share and to put ourselves as a knowledge company out there. So I'm doing some extra hours, and somehow every time that my own bucket list and my own pet projects seem to suffer from that, because those are the projects that I'm doing in the off hours. And I really want to make or write a book about NetScaler automation with PowerShell, and I already kind of have the framework up there, but now I need to start writing. And
Writing sucks.
What I discovered is if you want to write a book, you need at least a couple of hours to be able to focus and get the writing going. So still looking for those couple of hours. But definitely on the top of my pet project list. So today, as I mentioned, I'm going to share with you the PowerShell module that I've been writing for the last couple of months, at least this year. And I figured I'll make sure that everybody's at the same level when we are talking about NetScaler automation and NITRO, as they call their REST API. Particularly, I decided to at least include a small introduction on NITRO and REST API in the presentation. And after that, I will zoom in to the PowerShell module, the options it has, try to deliver a very cool demo, and if Claire doesn't cut me off, we'll be able to get to the bonus material. I'll show you some additional discoveries that I did geeking out with my PowerShell module. So as I mentioned, let's start with the introduction. RESTful APIs, or REST API for short. What they offer is a very basic client-server architecture that allows us to easily interact with application programmable interface with our web-based services, so to speak. And one of the benefits is that the standards were built to make sure that it would be easily understandable and it would be easy to connect to it by using a very well-known protocol as the HTTP protocol. So we can use port 80 or port 443 for secure HTTP connections. And if we are talking about NITRO, which is the implementation of the REST API and the NetScaler, we are talking in a similar fashion. There's your client side, which is the client that you are running from. Or for instance, maybe some of you do not know that the web management console of the NetScaler translates the GUI-based commands and features that you select into a REST API call, which is sent to the same NetScaler, so to speak. And the NITRO web services that runs on your NetScaler. So as I mentioned, REST uses HTTP protocol. And if we are looking at an HTTP protocol, there are different components that we need to provide to send out an HTTP request. We need to provide a verb. We need to use an URI to connect to the web service. We need to include what HTTP method we are using, and the header and the body, of course. So to zoom into those components, if we are using NITRO, let's just start simple with the HTTP method. There are basically the default HTTP methods that we can use with NITRO as well. We use the get command to retrieve information from our NetScaler, the post to add new information to our NetScaler, a put command to change existing information on our NetScaler, so to speak, an update command, and the delete to just get rid of it all. The second component is the URI, and basically NITRO gives you two different URIs to work with. There's the config part of the URL that you enter to be able to configure or send configuration commands to your NetScaler, and there is the stat for statistical information. So if you want to know how much hits a V server gets, you can use the stat to retrieve those numbers. For my demo and my PowerShell module, I'm still focused on the config, and that will probably take me at least another couple of months to finish. But I really would like to dive into the stats as well, to see if I can build like a custom dashboard or nice reports on what the usage is, or even take it a step further, try to create dynamic ruling for automatically based on statistics of a V server or the load balancing servers that are in the back end, spin up more servers, more computing power to tone it down and make sure that it doesn't get over requested. Next, when we know that we want to configure something, we need to tell NITRO which resource we want to configure. So in this example, we are telling it that I want to add or configure NetScaler features. So I'm adding the resource type NS feature. And in some cases, you can even include a resource name to be very specific. For instance, which V server I want to address. And if we are talking about NetScaler features, we have different options. We can either enable or disable features. And we can specify that in our URL by adding an action parameter to it and defining whether I'm enabling or disabling that feature. So far, we're still just at the URI and the method. So I'm still not telling the NetScaler or NITRO what I want, what information I want to exchange. To do that, we need at least to specify a content type in our HTTP header, because the content type is kind of telling NetScaler how to interpret the information that I'm sending through the HTTP body. In this case, I'm going to use Json as my formatting for the body, and that eventually comes to the last part, which is our request body for the HTTP command. That, in this case, shows two different samples of using a JSON payload. The first one, simply to log on to your NetScaler and get your session started, be authenticated with it. And the second one is an example of how you create a load balancing visa. To sum it all up, this is basically the information we need to be able to make that NITRO or REST API call to our NetScaler. And I kind of already answered the why would I use NetScaler, NITRO question in the previous examples that I gave of the information. At least I think it's an easy way as we can use HTTP, that means that we'll probably have less problems with our firewall guys to make sure that the right firewall ports are open. Because usually, even within secure organizations, port 443 will probably be open between the different network segments. Or we'll have a less hard time to explain why we want to use 443 than, for instance, your PuTTY and your SSH ports. And as I mentioned, but that's probably pet project 355, something like that. I would really like to see if I can build dynamic ruling set to really automate how to configure that NetScaler based on environmental settings or statistics. And I think there's another reason to look into NITRO with the announcement that we now have NetScaler CPX devices or appliances, because that will enable us to also use that NetScaler in our containerized architecture, and that will open up a whole bunch of new possibilities, which will probably be project number 356. So these are some of the enhancements, because with every release of the NetScaler firmware, new enhancements are made to the NITRO API as well. So what do I need if I want to use or start using NITRO? You'll need at least NetScaler firmware 9.2 or later. I hope most of you are using later. I know some customers that are a little late adapters to technology improvements. So, and I also need a REST client. As I shown in one of the first slides, REST API is all about the client-server configuration. So I'll need a client to talk to the web service on the NetScaler. In this case, it's Postman, which is a plugin for Chrome that gives you a really nice and simple interaction with NITRO. But I can also use a programming language, for instance PowerShell. So I have everything set up now. I have my client, which will be PowerShell scripts. I have NITRO running on my NetScaler because it's running by default. But now I need to know what information to put in the Json payload to be able to get my configuration uploaded. So my first step to get that information or advice would be to go to the NetScaler download page, which is on your NetScaler within the management console. And it has links to download the NITRO API documentations, which is a collection of HTML pages that explains in detail. The first hit will automatically open the Getting Started guide, which gives you a basic understanding of how to use NITRO, like how to log on and get your session started with the NetScaler and how to send basic commands to it. But it also specifies each and every attribute or object we can use, we can configure, and all the different parameters that are available to send and use in our Json payload. And it also will give you a pretty good example of what that payload should be, how that payload should look like, or what it should look like. For me, my first steps were reading up on the Citrix blogs. There's a whole blog series of 5 different blog posts that takes you by the hand step by step through each and every of the major configurations using PowerShell and NITRO. And the cool part about reading through this blog post is that they even provide a PowerShell module that you can download and use for it to get you started. And that's what got me started. Because if you look at all the features that are included in the PowerShell module, that will get you pretty far configuring your NetScaler. At least that's what I thought. And when I dived into that module, I realized that it only included the HTTP post methods. So it's a great start to initialize your NetScaler configuration. But if I wanted to use it in a more management way or administrative way, then it wouldn't be sufficient, because I wouldn't be able to delete existing configuration items. I wouldn't be able to use get commands to retrieve and check if my post command was at least configuring it the right way. And it didn't allow me to delete certain configurations as well. So what I've been doing for the last couple of months is adding those additional HTTP methods in the PowerShell module by adding a lot or writing a lot of new functions for it. So let's look at the automation part. I think most of you who have been working with the NetScaler recognize this screen, or at least one of the versions of the screen. This is basically just using the administrative GUI of the NetScaler to just tick the boxes of the features that you want to have enabled. Click on OK, and it is configured for you. So that's a very basic way of doing it. Also a very manual way. To be able to automate it at least a little, we can use the command line interface, which would require typing in this command to at least enable some of the basic features of my NetScaler. Then if we move on, you'll notice that we need a bit more information to get started with NITRO, but this kind of does the same thing, but it can be fully automated with a PowerShell script. Especially if we use the PowerShell module, because that has a simple function, or at least if I first import the module, it has a very simple function called enable NS feature that allows me to simply specify which features I want to have enabled. And for those that really want to dive into NITRO and use the invoke REST method from that is included in PowerShell, I think as of version 3 if I'm not mistaken. This is a sample script of how you create your own JSON payload. Make sure that you combine it with all the other HTTP components that you need to make in your call. And eventually use the basic standard invoke REST method from PowerShell to send the same configuration to it. Basically, this is what the enable NS feature function does for you. So let's look at some of the basic configurations. When you first log on to your NetScaler, you're usually presented with this screen, because the NetScaler now automatically starts what I like to call my first logon wizard. That will guide me through the different steps to configure my basic NetScaler settings. For those that pay attention, there is already one tick mark in this example, one bullet green, because I already uploaded a license file to my NetScaler, because to test all my scripting, I have one NetScaler VPX that has a license file already uploaded through previous testing, but I do not save the configuration, so I can easily reboot it and have like a fresh start, except for the license that's already there. A more clearer view on screen. What it asks me to do is to at least configure my subnet IP address on my NetScaler, a hostname, DNS IP address, and time zone. And I hope it's still readable in the back. If not, just let me know, and we'll just skip to the demo. So what I did was simply use one configuration PowerShell script that uses that PowerShell module that has all the functions, and basically just build a function for each and every of those logon steps that needs to be configured. So in the demo you'll see it run really quick. So this is just to give you an idea of what the PowerShell is in the module. Well, that's just basic settings, which is pretty cool, but it doesn't really offer me a full automated NetScaler configuration. So let's start and look at load balancing, which is a very common and very highly used feature of the NetScaler. So I wanted to be able to configure an architecture like this. And this is my way of kind of making the NetScaler configuration and dependencies visible. So I hope it's also understandable for you guys. But basically what it does is I configure at least one virtual load balancing server for storefront in this case to have it to have people connected through SSL, and I use a second load balancing fee server to make sure that I can do an HTTP redirect. And in order to do that, I need to configure some responder and rewrite policies on my NetScaler as well. So I started with the rewrite and responder policies. Basically wrote functions for that as well, so I can easily include those policy objects, policy and the actions. Rewrite policies, rewrite actions. Which allows me to quickly configure those and be able to use them and bind them later on to the virtual server on my NetScaler. So next step was to make sure that I create the servers, services, and service groups that I need to bind to my fee server. Which basically, it's kind of repeating, but with the demo I'll show you some of the code in more detail. And last but not least, we'll need some monitors and the fee servers configured as well. So basically, just run the commands, and there is some. I can't say I was able to do all the error handling in my functions because I'll probably miss some of it because I still feel like a PowerShell noob. So I'm learning as I go along, but at least this works and it doesn't show any errors so far. But my example is all about talking through SSL to my storefront server. So I not only need to be able to configure that virtual server, I also need to be able to upload the SSL certificates that I need for that server to be able to communicate SSL. So I wrote some functions for that as well, to be able to upload files to the NetScaler and be able to create those key pairs on my NetScaler and eventually bind them through my fee server. So that's to give you a short introduction to the fun stuff. So let's look at the fun stuff. So let me just quickly switch. And I hope that's still readable in the back. No complaints yet, or else just move forward and get a better view. Let me just hook up the mouse. So basically what I did was I used the existing PowerShell module from Citrix, which includes a lot of coding and a basic function called invoke NITRO REST API call. And that basically builds the URL that I need to provide. It builds the Json payload and it pushes it to the NetScaler. So Citrix already made my life easy by providing me with that function. And as I mentioned, what I basically did was add a lot of functions to be able to, I think this one was created by Citrix as well, the add NetScaler server function, but I also created a function to update it, remove it if necessary, and during my troubleshooting, very important to get the information from the NetScaler as well. So what I did was I built a new PowerShell script to that basically imports that module, that modified module that, with my extended functions, and I set up my NetScaler connection to HTTPS to make sure that it's secure and that the password that is just clear text. This script is at least not sent in clear text to the NetScaler. And as you saw before, I wrote the different functions to be able to send those basic settings, load balancing settings, etc. to my NetScaler. So let me just quickly log on to the NetScaler to prove to you, at least I hope that I'm proving that to you. This is the first logon wizard that pops up if I log on to my NetScaler for the first time. So if I now run my script, I have now entered the basic configuration. So if I refresh this page, you'll see that all of a sudden, if I should log on to the NetScaler, I would not be confronted with that first logon wizard, because basically I configured all the different steps. So now I have all the green marks, and I instantly directed to the configuration page. So that's nice. But I wanted to make sure that I enable some of the features on my NetScaler, because what you could see is that I do have that Platinum license file up there, but I wanted to make sure that I have configured some of the NetScaler modes that I need. And some of those basic and advanced features that are required to be able to configure that load balancing configuration. So back to the script. As I've shown, I need some app expert rules. Hang on, let me just make this a little bit bigger so you can see at least some of those. I need some traffic management. I need to create the virtual servers. I need to create the V servers, bind all the services to that V server. And in just a couple of seconds, so to speak, I have enabled the features that I need. And for the load balancing section, I have created my servers. I even created a storefront monitor to make sure that that is configured as well. I created a service group. I even created a service to make sure that I'm able to do an HTTP to HTTPS redirection on my NetScaler. And eventually I created the virtual servers. The two virtual servers that I showed in the diagram. But there's still one virtual server down because what my script didn't do was configure the SSL certificate configuration. And I separated the two scripts because somewhere along the line between switching between the NetScaler configuration to show you that I actually configured it, and getting back to the PowerShell script, there's a timeout. So just to make sure I configured the SSL through the second script. So let's just run that script, get all the certificates uploaded, and check on my NetScaler again. And if I just do a refresh, then my configuration is completed.
Can
Yes,
I ask a question? It seems like the configuration has not been saved, but is that because you have that in the script?
Well, what I can do is there is a function in the module that saves your configuration, but as I mentioned, I'm still going back and forward between the NetScaler, and I want to make sure that I start with a fresh, so to speak, NetScaler. I'm not using that function to configure or to save my configuration. So it does look like it's not saving anything. In this case, that's because I programmed it that way. And just to make sure that everything is working as I want it to work, I'll just log on to that virtual storefront server that I created on my NetScaler through HTTP. And for those of you that can see that, it's automatically changing to HTTPS communication through the redirection policies that I bind it to my V server. And I also created, I think it's a rewrite policy if I'm not mistaken, because I do tend to mix what is the responder and what is the rewrite, but it's in the code. That extends the basic URL sf.demo.lab with /citrix/store-web to direct the users to, so to say, the default store that I want them to log on to and store from.
That's the responder.
Thank you. That's true, because the responder sends it back to the client, right? And the rewrite is just for the backend communication. I did learn something from it. So basically, that's just my short demo showing you how powerful PowerShell can be to automate your NITRO or your NetScaler configuration. So let's return to because so far Claire hasn't stopped me from sharing some of my bonus scripts that I included in this presentation. Because what I've shown you so far is that it's very easy with that module to create your PowerShell configuration scripts. But that still kind of runs with the assumption that the NetScaler is already up and running. And that got me started, or at least it kind of annoyed me, because what I'm really looking for is basically start to end automation setup. So I looked at some of the knowledge base articles that Citrix provides to automatically import a NetScaler VPX image on your hypervisor. And as a CTP, I of course started with send server, which probably is not very useful for a lot of you guys, but bear with me. So the knowledge base article simply stated the different xe.exe commands or xe commands that I can run on my send server to import that VPX appliance and give it a fixed IP address. And that was what I was looking for, because that would allow me to import the device, know which IP address it has as a NetScaler IP, and I'll be able to continue with my scripts to automatically start configuring it through NITRO. So I translated all the different XE commands that were in the article to a PowerShell script. And I hope Todd is not really actually checking my code, because he'll probably have a few pointers for me. And for those of you who are interested in it, I made sure that there's a blog post on my website to share that script with you as well. But as I mentioned, that's still Zen server, and I realize probably not a lot of production environments run Zen server, even though Citrix gives us different numbers. So I went back to the knowledge base articles and searched for a solution for ESX. And luckily for me, there was a knowledge base article which showed me all the manual configuration steps I need to do on that imported NetScaler VPX appliance. That's still not giving me an automated solution. So once again, I translated all those manual instructions into a script, a PowerShell script, to be able to set some advanced settings on my VM that gives it that fixed IP address when it first boots. Because basically what the VPX appliance is programmed for is that at first boot it checks for some advanced settings in the VM that it's running in on the hypervisor, and if it finds IP settings, it will instantly use those IP settings to configure the NetScaler IP. So that's the process behind it. And the script is also up on the website, so feel free to download it and use it. I also showed you to be able to do the SSL configuration that I needed to upload certificate files to the NetScaler. Luckily for me, as of NetScaler firmware 10.5 and up, there is a file, so to say, function or command in NITRO to upload files to your NetScaler. But that requires you to specify the file content as a base 64 formatted string. In my case, that's not really usable to at least explain it to the different administrators that I want to use the script. So it had to be more simple. Even though I was able to, yeah, I'm proud of that, I was able to just read the document and translate it into the base 64 string and just use that function. It's still limited to just 2 MB sized files. For certificates, that's probably not a limit that we'll reach. But if you want to upload bigger files, or for instance, use this mechanism to do work on your backup and restore files on your NetScaler and offload them and onload them when you need to do a restore, this will not work. But there's a WinSCP wrapper that you can instantly install on your machine and include in your PowerShell scripts that allows you to use WinSCP to communicate with your NetScaler and upload files in case you need to be able to do that. So that's just a small learning lesson that I wanted to share with you. Basically, it just allows me to point to a file or the file location. I do not have to worry about the base 64 coding anymore, and it will use the wrapper to upload the file to the NetScaler. And once again, there's some blog posts on it. And as I shown in the demo, that I use HTTPS to communicate in a more secure way with my NetScaler. When I first tried that, it didn't really work. Somehow I got all these errors, and then I had to Google it, and I realized that the standard NetScaler has a SHA-1 certificate on it, and that's not trusted by even most browsers nowadays, but it's definitely not trusted by PowerShell because it has a conflict, because that certificate is not existing on your client devices. You can force PowerShell or your machine to accept any certificate that is thrown at it, so to speak. So I just told it to ignore all the security checks. So it's not like the best solution, but at least it enables me, because I need to be able to make that first connection to my NetScaler, and I do want it to be secure and not just use HTTP, to at least configure a certificate on my NetScaler and bind that to the NetScaler services to be able to just have secure, correctly certified, thank you, set up on my NetScaler. So just to make sure that I'm not opening up any security risks and vulnerabilities on the client machine, I made sure that by the end of the script I at least reset it to...
That's only for that session.
Yeah.
Yeah, that PowerShell instance.
Okay, that's
So it's
good to
not
know.
the-
I wasn't really sure, but
It's not
thanks.
the whole machine, it's only for that.
Okay.
instance.
So it's just secure or unsecure for the
Still not
time the
great.
script is running or the sessions I have open on my machine. It's not the best answer, so if there are some different solutions for that, I'm very open for any other suggestions. But for now, this works, and it enables me to go to the to the next items on my long list of features that I want to have included. So I've been talking a lot about scripts and the module that I created, the sample scripts that I'm using to configure my NetScaler, to check if that configuration is working or is set. And I wanted to make sure that they're easily available to each and every one to be downloaded and used for your own benefits. So I uploaded it to GitHub, and as I mentioned, I still feel like a PowerShell no. I still feel like a totally naive, ignorant GitHub user, so I have no idea if I'm using it in the way it is intended to be, because somebody already asked me, when are you gonna add
Branches.
Oh yeah, for instance. Okay. So for now, I'm just happy that I got it uploaded, and no, they were talking about open source licensing.
Oh yeah, you set the licensing good.
Yeah, that's so. Any help is appreciated, and any input or improvements to the script, please feel free to contact me, or use GitHub as it's supposed to be, and just send in those requests. Because I think I know how to make sure that that's implemented in the scripts as well. So apparently we still have time for a couple of questions.
When your scripts configure a blank NetScaler,
That's
you've
true.
got anything that takes one you've configured manually and creates a script that would configure the next one exactly the same. So extract the configuration and write a script to
No, but I know this guy that wrote the NetScaler documentation scripts called Buddy Schiffer, one of the other CTP buddies. And I know that he has a way to extract the NSConf file and just push it to the next NetScaler. But I haven't tried to just read, to do an iterative process of getting all the configuration items from my NetScaler and pushing it on to the next. So I'll add that on my list of 357 items now. So any more questions? Well, then that's a wrap, so to speak. Thank you all.